This is the Red Sea off the Saudi coast, an alternative route for Saudi oil to reach global markets due to the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz. Or at least it was, because this Saudi tanker, the Encilia, was struck by a missile last night, though all the crew are safe. Another Saudi ship, the Layla, was also attacked, forcing others to reverse course and sending the oil price up to $100 a barrel for the first time since May. It was the Houthis in Yemen, armed and advised by Iran's Revolutionary Guard, seen here celebrating on Monday when they launched their own blockade on Saudi shipping. And with it, these tribesmen are threatening to create a second maritime choke point on the global economy.
We affirm to the Saudi enemy that any folly or aggression targeting our country will be met by large-scale operations deep within its territory, and the consequences will be dire for it, by Allah's will and power.
More than a decade ago, the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, went to war with the Houthis, a war which caused the world's worst humanitarian disaster. One question is whether President Trump can restrain his notoriously impetuous ally this time. And this afternoon, the president signalled that he would take control of the Houthi threat. If they do this again, Mr. Trump wrote on social media, the US will hold Iran responsible, in that the Houthis are a surrogate and/or proxy of Iran, and major military punishment will be inflicted upon Iran and, of course, the Houthis themselves. But the fact remains that it's the Iranians who are still able to attack American interests across the Gulf. This was their strike on a US military base in Jordan last week. And yesterday, the Commander-in-Chief welcomed 4 of his fallen soldiers home, from a war in danger of widening to include not just the Houthis, but what the president calls a massive attack on Iran to get it to negotiate. Yesterday, that looked a lot harder after Chris Wright, America's energy secretary, antagonized the Iranians by signing a deal on a Saudi nuclear energy program. The US nuclear company Westinghouse stood to make billions from the Saudis, who in time would be allowed to enrich uranium on Saudi soil. But after a chorus of condemnation, Mr. Trump today set conditions. The Saudis would have to join the Abraham Accords, which recognize the State of Israel. There will be no enrichment of material, the president posted this afternoon, adding that the deal is totally subject to Saudi Arabia joining the very respected and successful Abraham Accords.
Yes, this deal with Saudi Arabia, the energy deal, is contingent on this condition as far as the president is concerned. So we'll continue to talk with our Saudi counterparts to get the deal finalized and hopefully see them joining the Abraham Accords very soon.
Today, the Iranian regime was rejoicing in the launching of its missiles. What with the Houthis joining in, a Saudi nuclear deal apparently in tatters, and the price of oil sky high, the Trump presidency risks looking ever more like a deeply destabilizing ally.
Jonathan Rugman reporting there. Well, how has Washington responded to the news of this on-off nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia? Let's go to Kieran Woodley, who is near Capitol Hill. Kieran, what's going on?
Look, Donald Trump is famous for his art of the deal, but it seems quite clear that, business deals in the 80s and 90s are very different to diplomatic ones today, not just with the Iran ceasefire deal, which lies in tatters, but also this Saudi nuclear deal, with President Trump saying that the Saudis have to recognize the State of Israel, join those Abraham Accords, that he seems to have added that stipulation after the deal was agreed. So there's clearly a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions, and I went to the Capitol earlier today and put some of those questions to the senators to find out what they made of what was going on.
I think I certainly have some questions. Obviously, civilian use of nuclear energy is something that's generally accepted, but I want to make sure it's done under the appropriate oversight and safeguards with the IAEA and it's fully transparent.
Why do you think it's been done now? Do you think it's going to make things safer and better in the region?
I think you'd have to ask the president.
President Trump says they will have to sign Saudi the Abraham Accords. Therefore, if that was to take place, would you support the bill? Would it get congressional approval?
I would have to see what kind of safeguards there are, but certainly there's no normalization agreement, which I have viewed as a condition.
Just more broadly on the Middle East, and with
Okay.
the price of oil rising,
Yeah.
concerns about escalation. Do you have concerns?
I think we need to draw this to a close. We need to get both straits, the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, open.
Is it that easy, though, to open the Strait of Hormuz? Just to say,
Well, apparently not.
Great trawl of senators there, Kieran. Is Trump keeping Congress in the loop this time?
well, you know, talking to senators on both sides, both parties, Democrats and Republicans, there is a real sense that they don't know what the White House is up to when it comes to the Saudi deal or what it comes up to the war in Iran and what happens next. And yesterday I sat down with Senator Chris Coons. He's a senior Democrat, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and I asked him whether he was worried that the president might in fact be looking at escalation when it comes to the conflict with Iran.
No, I think he's actively weighing whether to actually carry out his threats to put U.S. troops on the ground and capture Kharg Island or to bomb other remaining facilities. But, you know, look, there's real limits to how much more he can accomplish with air power alone. So if they're going to try and broaden and escalate, they're going to need to persuade the American people, and I would argue the American people's representatives in Congress.
Is the concern here that Trump's just not listening to Congress?
Of course, Trump's not listening to Congress.
Do you think Trump sees an opportunity or he's just stuck here in a bind?
I think he's just stuck.
All the senators want more dialogue and more details, but it really seems like this administration is plowing on ahead regardless of questions about security in the region or about the price of oil back here home in America. And the real concern is that the president may in fact be heading towards escalation.
Kieran Woodley in DC, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me now is the former US ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Michael Ratney. Ambassador Ratney, great to have you on the program. I mean, the Saudis are having a pretty bad week, aren't they, at the moment? The deal with the US isn't quite what we thought it was, or what they thought it was. And now they've found that the other strait through which they're exporting their oil, the Bab el-Mandab, has also been closed, threatened by the Houthis. How are they going to respond to all this?
Yeah, so all of that, plus they're trying to navigate this relationship with President Trump, which is never easy. But they feel like ultimately their security is going to depend upon a good relationship with the United States, particularly on security issues. As you point out, you know, they just signed, negotiated and signed this nuclear deal just yesterday. And then President Trump, less than 24 hours later, introduces new conditions which were never part of the deal. And you're right, it comes the same week that the Houthis choose to escalate the war, essentially either on their own or as proxies of the Iranians. The two aren't necessarily related, except they're both indicative of what happens when you have utterly incoherent policymaking in Washington.
Right. And so part of the Abraham's Accord, should the Saudis agree to them, would be that they would have to recognize the state of Israel, and they've said they will only do that if there is a Palestinian state. So that's a non-starter, isn't it?
Right. And the Saudi condition on that is not going to change. You know, this discussion started several years ago in the Biden administration. There was supposed to be a grand deal that involved a U.S.-Saudi defense treaty, Saudi-Israel normalization, and a number of other things, including measures that advance Palestinian statehood. Those are things that Israel would have to commit to. For a lot of reasons, including Israel's refusal to contemplate Palestinian statehood, the whole normalization deal and the whole treaty issue kind of collapsed. Trump keeps trying to reintroduce this idea of Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords, but without addressing the fundamental issue that caused it to stumble in the first place.
So if the Saudis can't export their oil through the Strait of Hormuz, and they're finding it very difficult to export it through the Bab el-Mandab Strait, I mean, they're in big trouble, aren't they, in terms of their main revenue, because the Suez Canal doesn't quite do it. Do you think they'll use military force to get a solution?
Yeah, so this is tough, right? Even with the Strait of Hormuz closed, they were still able to export about 80% of their oil through the Red Sea, through the Bab el-Mandeb. If indeed that's closed, that creates enormous problems. As you point out, the Suez Canal is not going to do it, and the pipelines really aren't going to take the oil to their markets, particularly in Asia. Does that lead to military escalation? I think almost certainly. I think between Saudi Arabia and the United States, I don't think they're going to see an alternative to trying, again, military pressure on the Houthis, although in the past it hasn't worked that well.
If you take everything to account that's going on right now, and I think the ceasefire is done and dusted, isn't it? How much more dangerous is this moment for the region and the world than where we were, at the beginning of this war of choice in March?
I think there's a lot of danger in front of us. President Trump seems to think military escalation will gain him more leverage against the Iranians. But they've shown over and over again that they don't really respond to that, and they have the capacity to do untold damage to Gulf economies, civilian infrastructure, desalination facilities, energy infrastructure. Oil has already peaked above $100 a barrel. We're back into the territory that we were in the middle of the war, but at a time when oil inventories globally are at historic lows. So I think the potential disruption to energy markets is far higher than it was even earlier in this war.
Ambassador Michael Ratley, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.